Welcome, this is a Concept to Concrete webinar presented by the Sports Facilities Advisory and the Sports Facilities Management. My name is Dev Pathik. I'm the founder and CEO of the Sports Facilities Advisory and founding partner of the Sports Facilities Management. Today's session will help all of you who are in the planning, right-sizing, financing, or opening phases of a new sport or recreation facility. The goals for the session are to overview our proven process, provide insights into your next steps, and improve your likelihood of success in getting a project opened that is both right-sized to your facility, to your market demographics, properly conceived of, and that meets its financial and its economic impact objectives. There are 7 development stages, and so the question for you as the audience is, which of these are you in? If you're in pre-feasibility and you're considering a concept, you've not gone out to feasibility study yet, but you have a basic idea in your mind of what you want to do, some sort of an indoor and outdoor sport or recreation venue, and you've got a concept in your mind probably based on what you've seen somewhere else. That's pre-feasibility. If you are in market feasibility study phase, that means that you have actually gone out and you're conducting market research, you're looking at demographics, you're looking at competitors, and you are really putting pen to paper as it relates to what your financial and other forecasts might look like. If you've completed your financial forecasts, your business plan, and your market feasibility study, you may be in the final design phase where you're actually looking at details in your design, interior finishes, bidding out pricing on various elements, flooring, lighting, turf, aquatics equipment, ice equipment, whatever the facility might be. In the design phase, you are typically still making some final decisions just before you go out to finance. If you are out to finance, you've got a design in mind, you've completed your business plan, your market feasibility studies, and you're shopping for the right funding partner. At this point, you've got a financial forecast in hand. It's probably an institutional grade financial forecast backed up by some third-party verification. All of that is required for those of you who are going out to finance in most cases, unless you're simply using general obligation bonds and the creditworthiness of the public entity, if that's where you are, if you're a public developer of a facility as opposed to a private developer, if the financing is simply rated or based upon the general obligation commitment of your community, there are some projects that go out to finance without having done a market feasibility study or a financial forecast. Unfortunately, those projects are often met with difficulty both in the financing phase or in post-financing once the facility is open in trying to maintain or sustain the financial forecast that had originally been put on paper. Some of you who've achieved financing may be under construction and preparing to open, and others may be operational. Those are the 7 stages. So in the webinar, we would ask you to please mark the stage that you're in so that we can see your responses. That will help us tailor our messages throughout this webinar to you. I said earlier, my name is Dev Pathik. I'm pleased to be here today. I'm here as a representative and the Chief Executive Officer of the Sports Facilities Advisory and Sports Facilities Management. Our mission is to improve the health and economic vitality of the communities we serve, and we do that by developing and managing all types of sport and recreation facilities. In total, we've completed nearly $8 billion in funding packages for community-based sport and recreation centers, sports tourism facilities, zipline aerial park adventure centers, BMX parks, aquatics facilities, ice, anything you might imagine in the sport or recreation space. We've probably had our hand in forecasting that type of model. So we've spent the last 14 years conducting research in more than 1,400 markets around the world. Well, what I'm going to talk to you now about is what we call the right way. So I'm going to share with you what we think the right way to development is. This step-by-step approach and this multi-phased approach tends to prevent problems later. It tends to address problems earlier and generally leads to more successful outcomes both in the operational phase but also in the financing phase. There are 5 major steps. We say right concept. That's the step where you'll be casting a vision, defining success. Right plan. That's the step where you're doing a market-specific analysis. You are using a vision that you have to drive the design in terms of outcomes that you want. You are at this stage in the right planning phase, getting your business plan, your financial forecast, your market research done so that you end up with an institutional grade financial forecast that the project will be based on and that funding and financing and support will be based on. If you've got the right concept and the right plan, you've probably started to build your team. You've probably got good advisors on board with you, people who've done this before. You've got local community members, maybe a few partners. But now it's time to really finalize who's on the team. And so the right concept leads to the right plan, leads to step 3, which is the right team. And this team can include ownership, which oftentimes is variable until you get into the final phases of a project. Sometimes a hospital or a league or user group or other group might take a small ownership stake or a significant ownership stake in a project, and that can obviously transform who's on your team and can right size and properly organize your team. You also need to think about facility operations and management. When you go to funding and you're out to finance for a project like this, one of the first questions you're going to get is who's going to manage and operate this? What have they done before? How do these financial forecasts match up to what they have done before? So having a management team with expertise and experience is critically important. You'll need a construction team, a legal, and a finance team in this phase as well. The right funding. Before you go to funding, you've got your team built, you have a good plan, and your concept and vision are clearly defined, your definitions of success have been defined, so now you're ready to go to funding. You've got an institutional grade financial forecast and an experienced management team. Right funding is not just about securing capital, it's about getting the right debt and equity mix. So the debt is the portion of the project that will be financed over a period of time, just like a house, so you're going to have a mortgage payment that will have to be paid. And then the equity is the cash in. The terms of the loan, meaning the interest rate, the length, anything that might impact the payback of that loan also, or the equity, need to be considered in the right funding approach. And then the long-term impact on operations. So if, as an example, you have too much debt service, if your monthly mortgage payment is too high, that can affect operations, because now you get into operations and you don't actually have the cash you need to invest in marketing or sponsorship or advertising or any other number of other things. Without those, they can have the improper or incorrect or non-qualified funding could lead to negative impacts on the operations. So it's very important to have the right kind of funding. And all of this should be vetted out in terms of the ratios of debt to equity, and the terms should have been vetted out during the institutional grade financial forecasting phase back at the right planning step. And then you get to right execution. And the way we know that something has been properly executed is that it's on time, it's on budget, and it is on mission, which is critically important for these facilities. So those are the major steps. Let's dive into what each of them is. So the first is vision casting and defining success. So we often say that goal setting and vision casting define and bring definition and clarity to the purpose of the facility, and they create a rallying point towards which your team can strive. So if, as an example, the vision and the definitions of success are to develop a world-class sports tourism venue that will drive overnight hotel stays into a particular region, that becomes the rallying point, and your team is built around that. You may involve the Convention and Visitors Bureau or your Sports Commission or tourism or any number of other partners in that vision. If, on the other hand, your vision is to open a for-profit indoor sports complex, then profitability and driving returns and customer retention and customer satisfaction, all important to the other development as well, but they become rallying points for your team. That become really important. So this early vision casting is a step that is often overlooked as critical, but in fact it is. Visioning that defines success in terms of impact, meaning economic impact, health impact, social impact, impact on quality of life, impact on your partners and their ability to generate revenue, like your hotel partners or others. All of these things, including then destination branding and competitive advantage, are all elements that need to be part of your vision, and they lead to innovation. So if you have, as an example, a vision statement that is to improve the health and the economic vitality of our community, to improve the social connectivity of our residents, to strengthen the destination or the community's brand so that it's known as an innovative and creative and healthy environment. And to do that in a way that allows us to be competitive against other communities, you can imagine that all of those requirements that you've layered into your vision statement become important, and they lead to innovation or the development of models and programming that can become very important to the overall success of your facility, but also to setting expectations that can later be met. There are different types of visions. One financial goal-setting vision, as an example, would be something like, by 2027, we'll increase sports tourism spend by 25% over levels prior to the opening of the venue. That would be true for an economic development project that's sports tourism. We might also set a goal as a private developer to say by 2027, we'll be fully operational. Our debt service we will have begun to pay down our debt service, and by 2029, the partners and owners will begin to receive distributions from the project. Whatever those are, those financial goal-setting objectives ought to be part of the mix of how you cast your vision. For more broad visioning for an entire community or for a development that's multi-faceted, we might end up with a goal or setting and vision example something like this. By 2028, we'll be second to none in terms of sports amenities. That means we need to know who's out there, what they're doing, and we need to find ways to be better than and to have opportunities for athletes and players to access amenities that don't exist anywhere else. We need to be viewed as a leader among our direct competitors is the second bullet in this vision statement. So being viewed as a leader means that they're copying us and they are calling or visiting us to learn about us. If part of the vision is to offer programming that's uniquely ours, that means we need to develop programs, summer camps or other programs, after school programming, or the way that we train athletes or the way that we manage events. We need to do those in ways that are unique to us and not simply port over to our new facilities something that's been done 100 times before. And then we have an improved sports tourism spending, and that means revenue through overnight stays spent in hotels and on leisure activities. If you're going to increase that kind of spending, you probably have a lot of opportunity on the sponsor and partner side that wouldn't exist where you're not creating that kind of a win for other businesses or other opportunities, organizations in the community. So we've talked about right concept, and now let's move to right plan. So from our perspective, the plan proves that you're prepared to take full advantage of the opportunities. It can mitigate risks, and it proves that you're ready to achieve the vision. The right plan should create a sense of reliability and sustainability in the business model, and it needs to support the achievement of your vision. The plan ultimately needs to be driven into an institutional grade financial forecast. You can have a lot of narrative documentation defining what the mission and purpose and vision of a facility is, but if you go to seek financing, some of those things will be important, but most of the requirements for financing sources will be contained within an institutional grade financial forecast or pro forma. The pro forma should include construction and startup costs, the program plan, the facility's revenue and expenses for the entire facility in every area all year round, and then business unit pages that describe what revenue is going to look like from summer camps, as an example, or from basketball programming, or from softball programming, or whatever the programs are. An institutional grade pro forma provides that level of comprehensive detail. The process is, first and foremost, step one is to right-size the facility program to the market demographics. That requires research into the socioeconomic and other demographic factors in the community. It should include construction and startup cost estimates from prior projects that are similar in nature, not simply from a local general contractor, but that local general contractor, or whoever the developer is, needs to consider and look at construction startup cost estimates from other similar developments. It should be data driven, so the revenue and the expense projections need to be based on both the local demographics, the spend pattern, the competition, and they should be benchmarked against other facilities. The fourth element to an institutional grade pro forma or financial forecast is that it needs to be market and business model driven in the way that it assigns fixed expenses. So You may have certain programming that requires you to have full-time staff on an annual basis that would not be required with the program in some other place. But the business model needs to assign and based on the market reality, what the fixed operating expenses are. Those fixed operating expenses would be things like your regular debt service, your staffing model, anything that is going to be an ongoing, regular, fixed expense. It should lay out the organizational structure, who's accountable to who, and finally it needs to validate utilization. In projects that are failing or that have not successfully met their original targets, we find that utilization is often at the heart of it. Early stage projections, it's easy to determine based on the market how many basketball players and how many volleyball players are in the market and what the market share might look like for those based on other markets. But then you have to schedule the space, and this means actually looking at the weekly schedule and the seasonal schedule of the facility, making sure that you don't put volleyball on top of basketball on the same court at the same time. So you have to consider what your utilization is. Validating that, including the hours of operation and what hours you're really going to be operated, what hours are peak, validating that becomes very important in the final phases of financing. There are some other factors that are important as we look at feasibility, and they include, as I've already said, the market demographic and socioeconomic, sports participation rates. If you're developing a sports facility, you need to know how many registered players are within your trade area. We need to look at your current assets and the competition analysis. So what do you already have that's in the community, and what is the local competition? All of that helps to assess feasibility. You definitely need to understand what the management and partner capabilities are. So do you have qualified and experienced management, or do you plan to outsource that is something you need to consider? And then your partners, what are they capable of? If the hospital or another institution level partner wants to join forces with you, what are their capabilities, what are their needs, and how are you going to partner with them to provide some sort of a differentiated experience for your guests or your customers or your players? You need to consider what your competitive advantages are, and both for the operation and for the business model. So in some cases, those competitive advantages can be things like the construction materials used. We have a client who uses domes. The dome-based project is constructed in less time, is about half as much in construction startup costs as a hard structure. Its real estate taxes are $75,000 versus $400,000 for the same size project. And so that's a competitive advantage because it means we have lower startup costs, means we have lower debt service, means we have lower general operating expenses, and that means we can be more competitive in the marketplace in terms of pricing. These are factors that need to be considered when you're creating a model that's going to require the kind of investment that any of these sorts of developments do. And then finally, you need some industry benchmarking. Putting forecasts on paper into a spreadsheet, anybody can do. But putting them on paper and then validating them against or benchmarking them against other communities with similar facilities and making direct comparisons is something that most financing sources want. So a quality feasibility assessment will do that. One of the problems we see in a lot of feasibility studies is that they'll list out comparable facilities, but they don't have, the provider doesn't necessarily have insight into how those facilities are operating. I recently reviewed a feasibility study that had 9 comparable facilities in it, and I knew that 6 of the 9 were failing to meet their original financial forecasts, and all 6 of the 9 were in trouble. That's not quality benchmarking. Just because it looks like the facility you want to develop does not mean it performs like the facility you want to develop. So whatever industry benchmarking you're going to do, when you select a firm to do your feasibility study, make sure they have insight into the actual financial and economic performance of the facilities they're going to use as comparables, and ask them that very early before you engage any firm. Ask them for an example of a feasibility study or a pro forma so you can see exactly what you're going to have delivered, and ask them to walk you through how they got to those projections and that forecast before you agree to engage a firm. There are a lot of folks out there putting business plans and feasibility studies together that don't ultimately have as much strength as they should. Okay, time to talk about your team. So you've got millions of dollars on the line. It's not the time for on-the-job training. This is something we say on a regular basis. So the right team, and what we mean by this is the full team, allows you to partner with others to achieve success. That right team should include a diverse and invested ownership group. however that ownership group is developed, whoever the owners of the facility are, they need to be invested and engaged in the process. And if they are not, then an oversight committee that provides day-to-day oversight, monthly budget versus actual and variance reporting, and just day-to-day leadership to the facility needs to be created. In many cases in a community, this is a diverse group representing tourism and parks and recs and city government or whoever that might be. But first and foremost, within the pie of the right team, you need an invested ownership and oversight committee. Then you're going to need proven management and operations team. Just because a group has run a facility before does not mean they're prepared to run this new kind of facility. So you want to make sure you've got expertise and that they are proven at that level. Otherwise, you've done all of this forecasting, all of this financing and development to put this 10 or 15 or 20 or larger $1 million project in the hands of folks that just don't yet know how to steer that ship. You don't want to do that. So early on, make sure you've bulked out the experience and the quality and the proven track record of your operational team. You'll need an experienced design and construction team. Ideally, they've done projects that are similar. A veteran legal team that is representing you and nobody else. Your legal advisors. Even if you get legal advice from some of your service providers, at the end of the day, you need legal counsel that is solely dedicated to your well-being and has no conflict of interest. And on the finance team, we're often involved on finance teams, but on the finance team, you need somebody from your local community and somebody, ideally a CPA, who is working solely for you as an owner's rep to make sure that things are going off as you would like them to. We're going to move to right funding. So the next step in the ladder here is right funding. And when we often say funding is more than just getting the money to build it. It's getting the right mix of funds from the right mix of sources to support your vision, mission, and definitions of success. So the right funding means that you have got a team and you've got terms that work for you that support the ongoing operations. First factor is equity. Equity is the amount of capital, the land, and the other contributions you have into the project which do not require you to take on debt service. That's one portion of funding. The second portion of the actual cash that goes in these projects is debt financing. So this is 10, 15, 20-year term debt with an interest rate that will require an ongoing mortgage payment for that period of time. Now, those mortgage payments may not have to start for the first 3 months or even first 6 months, but you'd be accruing interest during that period of time. These are very important factors. If you have too much debt and your mortgage payment is too high, you can sink the operation just simply because all you're doing every month is paying that debt service. So it's very important to get the right amount of upfront equity and to control the debt. In many cases, the debt and equity mix is 50-50. In some cases, it is much higher, but those are typically on the public side, and that debt service is not necessarily required to be paid out of the operations. But on private development, the debt service will have to be paid out of operations, so it is even more important that you control the debt. The other factor of funding is contractually obligated income. If you arrive on day one or pre-funding with an agreement from, let's just say, a hospital that's going to lease a certain amount of space from you, if you arrive with an agreement between you and say a local league or a club or organization where they're going to rent space on an ongoing basis, that is contractually obligated revenue into the facility. If you have a contractually obligated revenue that comes from the public side, sometimes that can include a lease payment paid up and into the operation, which is ongoing, which exceeds the debt service. That flow of cash would be considered contractually obligated revenue. The other factors in funding are the management capabilities. The funding sources will ask, who's managing this? Who will manage it? What have they done before? How have they performed before? Show me how they performed before. All of that becomes very important. Forecasting your financial performance is obviously a factor within funding. The accuracy, the research behind, the benchmarking behind your financial forecast is critically important. And these documents need to be handled in a very tight way. We often say that one mistake in a financial document is viewed typically or experienced like a cockroach. There's never just one. So you want to avoid those cockroaches in your financial forecasting and have professionals involved at that stage. It's no different than any other stage within this. You will need professionals who are involved to help you accurately forecast the future performance of your facility. And the last factor is whether or not you have unique advantages. Bo Jackson's Elite Sports outside of Chicago and outside of Columbus, Ohio, both have a unique advantage. They arrive on day one with Nike and Gatorade as sponsor partners. They arrive on day one with Bo Jackson on the radio and able to get television and press and media coverage that would not exist were it not for Bo. Those are unique advantages to that particular business model. In other cases where it's, say, sports tourism, the unique advantage may be the destination. The Myrtle Beach Sports Center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, its unique advantage is that it is located in Myrtle Beach. Rocky Top Sports World in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is located in a tourist destination with over 12 million visits a year. Rocky Top Sports World, its unique advantage is its destination. Tournaments and groups want to come there, and that creates a better draw, and it securitizes the funding because the destination is already built. These are very important factors. All right, so let's talk about getting this done. What does it take to go to financing? There are really 7 steps. So the first is to interview and select some qualified advisors. You will want people at your side when you're out to finance. No question about it. You need people that not only understand the numbers and the financial forecast, but they should understand something about the implications of various funding approaches on the project itself. You'll need an institutional grade financial forecast. That's a Wall Street ready document that can be interpreted and that provides great insight into the operation, into the utilization of the facility, and into the comparable facilities that it has been based upon or that the forecasts have been based upon. You need to understand the numbers. So regardless of whether you hire an outside firm and you get them very involved and they produce documents for you, there's going to come a point when you will need to understand the numbers inside and out. This is very important. You can't sit silent during funding and other presentations. As an owner, you need to understand something and have your advisors there to back up and provide research and other data. To get a project like this done, you have to challenge faulty assumptions. So some of those faulty assumptions would be things like, when you're meeting with funding sources, they may believe you're going to cash flow so well in year one that you should be able to cover 100% of your operating costs, when in fact the startup season for most of these facilities is about a 24 to 36 month season, and it's during that phase when you need enough capital and enough reserves of capital to see yourself into a successful operation. But season after season, as you're taking registrants for the first time, it takes a little bit of time to build a reputation. So you want to challenge those faulty assumptions early on. Do that in advance of people having to scrutinize the project. You definitely want to arrive at the table for funding presentations with endorsements from major institutions. These can be public-public partnerships, public-private partnerships. They can be endorsement letters. They can be letters for intent for use. But all of those, that credibility building and being able to demonstrate to the finance sources that you've got connectivity into the user groups or into the community become very important. 6, you want to stay ahead of the press, and by this we mean put out press releases on a schedule with a professional tone, written in a way that people are going to pick up the story. So that first press release announces the project, announces its forecasted opening date, identifies some of the location options or a location where it's going to be developed, and simply announces it, and maybe uses a few names from local community organizations or the public side or the private side to bring some credibility. But you want to stay ahead of that. And then press releases are probably going out every 2 to 3 weeks once you are heavy into the development phase, once you move through or are close to securing final finance. And then last, you need to plan to adapt. These are major developments. They take anywhere from 14 to 48 months to go from concept to concrete. And if you're not adaptable and you're not flexible, you'll miss something. So we've talked now about the right concept, the right plan, the right team, the right funding, and it's now time to talk briefly about right execution. Right execution is simple. For us, it means on time, on budget, and on mission. If you can achieve those things, you know you've had the right execution. If you cannot, then there may be challenges. So that execution means you need project planning skill sets. You need people who have done these things before. You have to develop programming, operations manuals, risk management, HR, and other policies. All of these things that allow you to execute will be critically important. And so this comes back to the quality of your team and the caliber of the people you've surrounded yourself with. We've had a great webinar. We hope that this has been useful to you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. If you're in the concept or early stages or any stages of facility development and you think we can be useful, please don't hesitate to visit us online at sportadvisory.com. Reach out to us. We absolutely love the work. We are blessed to get to do this every day and to bring facilities to life in communities that improve access to sport for all and improve the health of communities. So we will be absolutely thrilled and excited to talk with you, and we certainly look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and all the best.